Hello, and welcome to the 2021 version of Firearms Friday from the Wyoming State Museum here in Cheyenne. My name is Evan Green. I'm the volunteer firearms historian at the museum and have had the extremely pleasant task over the last 3 years of assisting the staff in updating inventory information on the firearms in the permanent collection. As with everything else, the pandemic sort of interrupted the process of making these videos. I hope you missed seeing them as much as I missed doing them. So today we're going to talk about this revolver. And this is a Smith & Wesson New Model Navy No. 3. It was the first double-action revolver made by Smith & Wesson in .44 caliber. The caliber is .44 Russian. Well, what does double action mean? Double action means that there are two ways of firing the handgun in that the trigger can perform two different functions. You'll notice that the trigger is centered in the guard, and if the trigger is pulled from that position, it will both lift the hammer and release it to fire the cartridge. So that's one action. The second action is if you cock the hammer on the revolver by hand, the trigger will release that hammer and fire the gun. So that's a double action. Lots of the firearms up until mid-1800s, 1860s were single action. Most of them cap and ball revolvers, in that they had to be loaded with loose powder, a projectile introduced into the front of the cylinder, and a percussion cap affixed so that the gun would fire. These cartridge revolvers were a major improvement in that the bullet, the powder, and the primer were all of a piece, so you could load the cartridge in and everything that it needed to discharge was attached. This is kind of interesting. The front sight on this looks to be half of a penny, which was not unusual in those days to use a coin of one sort or another as a replacement sight on a revolver. This is nickel-plated, and again, the nickel-plated finish was preferable in the days of corrosive black powder, because it was, again, much more durable than the blued versions. This has really nice and intact mother-of-pearl grips. They do not have the Smith & Wesson medallion on them, but you could order this revolver at the time with pearl grips. So I'm making the assumption that it came this way from the factory. So this was donated to the museum by a woman from back east who reached out to the staff and asked if they would be interested in acquiring a revolver with a connection to Tom Horne. Now you probably know who Tom Horne was. He was a scout in the Indian Wars in the Southwest. He was a fairly unsuccessful Pinkerton agent, and he came to Wyoming in the latter part of the 19th century to be a stock detective, and his job was basically eliminating rustlers, and he did that fairly efficiently by just killing them. And he was convicted of killing the young son of a sheep rancher named Willie Nickel, and he was hanged in Wyoming in 1903 in Cheyenne. So we have another revolver in the collection that was claimed to have belonged to Tom Horne, but it was manufactured in 1906, so unless he was a time traveler, that didn't happen. So, okay, was this a Tom Horne revolver? Well, it would have been available to him at the time he was in Wyoming, and the donor said that she had additional documentation that this had been Tom Horne's revolvers. But what she said was that this revolver was given to a Rock Springs attorney named Bates in lieu of payment for his defense. So I'm unaware of any court action against Horne other than when he was tried in Cheyenne for the Willie Nickel killing. So, and there was no Bates on that defense team at the time. So, could be, but you got to be skeptical. It would be neat if the firearm could be attributed to Tom Horne. You may know that if there is a connection to a famous person or to a famous event, that it greatly adds to the value of the revolver to collectors. The Colt Single Action Army that is alleged that Pat Garrett used to use to kill Billy the Kid recently sold at auction for $6 million. That's million with an M, for a revolver that, if it did not have that provenance, if it did not have that documented connection, would have probably sold for between $3,000 and $5,000. This is a break action revolver, which means that it opens up kind of like this hinge. It can be loaded with 6 cartridges, again in caliber .44 Russian. And when they're fired, that ejector pops those empties out, so you can reload that revolver very handily. So it is very quick to operate and kind of an interesting firearm. The Colt came out with a double action revolver about this same time, depending on the caliber. It was termed either the Thunderer or the Lightning or the Rainmaker, which is a cool name. But they had a reputation for being somewhat fragile, for going out of time, and for breaking parts. I currently have an early Colt double-action revolver at the gunsmith to replace a part, so I have some personal experience with early Colt firearms. Mine is a 1909 new service. So again, it's an interesting revolver. It is definitely possible that it was used on the frontier in the late 19th century. One of the interesting attributes of this revolver is that it is marked in several places with what appears to be a W and 4 vertical lines. It's marked on the cylinder, it is marked on this top rib, and it is marked on the front strap of the grip. W with 4 vertical lines. And I have no idea why anybody would put W and 3 lines on this nice revolver. So anyway, there it is. Smith & Wesson, New Navy Model 3, first double-action revolver made by Smith & Wesson in a major caliber. Thanks for listening.